Hello, everyone, and you're listening to the Triple T podcast, Tony's Tech Talks. My name is Tony Seminary, and I'm based in the city of Roses, Portland, Oregon. Thank you very much for listening to the show today. During my day job, when I'm not doing podcasts, I'm the founder and CEO of Itsmotive. We're a technology recruiting company, and we assist our clients in helping them find people for executive search, direct placement, and contract staffing, both on a retained and contingent basis. If you'd like to learn more about Itsmotive, please visit our website at itsmotive.com, and you can also listen to today's podcast there as well. The premise of Triple T, Tony's Tech Talks, is really to get to know people's stories, how they got into technology, and kind of what's going on in technology. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the guest of my show today. This is Elizabeth Stock from PDXWIT. She is the Executive Director of PDXWIT, which stands for Women in Technology. Elizabeth, it is a pleasure. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Very good, very good. I'm glad to have you. It's an absolute pleasure. The first question I'd like to ask you is, I'd like to learn more about your story and how you got to this point in your life. Couple questions, if you don't mind. Where did you grow up, and where do you call home today? And can you tell me more about your professional journey and how you got to this point in your life as the executive director of PDXWIT?
Sure. Yeah, I'll go way back here. So I was born in Miami, Florida, and I just spent a couple years there. And then when I was little, I think around 2, my dad's job moved us out to Los Angeles. So we were relocated. He was in the fashion industry. And so my mom, my older brother, and I, and my dad, we all moved out to LA. And so for the first couple months we were living there, the company temporarily put us in a house while my parents looked for an apartment in LA that they could afford. But for temporary times, we were in the Hollywood Hills, and in a house that otherwise we never would have lived in. But it was only a couple months that we were there, but it was very transformative. So the house we lived in was actually in the hills above the Universal Studios backlot. So where they were filming like action movies and all different kinds of things. Like, I'm going to date myself here, but Backdraft and Back to the Future and like a bunch of movies that are like so seminal today in my backyard were essentially being filmed. And so one of the shows they filmed back there was Miami Vice, which is kind of funny because I had just moved from Miami and suddenly every few days there was, I don't know if you watched this show or if people listening would even remember, but there was a Miami Vice helicopter. It said Miami Vice on the side, and it was a big part of the show. So we would see this helicopter going up and down in our backyard. So all this to say, we were kind of suddenly engulfed in the entertainment industry unintentionally. And we had a neighbor who approached my mom and said, "Hey, your kids are cute. Have you ever thought of putting them into commercials or modeling or acting?" And the thought had never even crossed my mom's mind at all. It was like so far from anything she ever would have imagined. But she decided to entertain the possibility. And pretty soon after, we got an agent, we got headshots, and we started working. So my professional life actually started when I was 2 years old.
My goodness.
With a commercial for Texas Instruments. And yeah, it's so funny. I've honestly never really talked about this in my PDXWIT days. No one really knows this, but why not? You asked about my childhood, and it's a pretty big part of it. So yeah, I worked quite a bit until I was in middle school. And then around when I was 13, 14, it just stopped being fun. It was, I was really insecure about my body, like acne. I mean, middle school is really hard for everybody, especially girls. And I just felt like I didn't want to do it anymore. So I told my mom, I don't want to do this anymore. And then by the next week, I was retired. So I've already had one retirement in my life. And then I just, went to high school, did normal kid stuff, was just really happy to be able to have a typical high school experience. And then it was time to go to college. And I had been in the Pacific Northwest quite a bit because a lot of things get filmed in Vancouver, British Columbia, and Portland. I had done a couple jobs. And so I had always seen this area through really rose-colored glasses, I think, because every time I was up here, it was summer or it was like those sunny springtime weekends. And so I was like, I want to live there after high school. Like, I don't want to live in LA. I want to go to the Pacific Northwest. So I went to Eugene, Oregon for college at University of Oregon, which I believe you're a Duck too, right?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Go Ducks.
So go Ducks. And it was a huge adjustment because I had only lived in Miami and LA where seasons and weather aren't really a factor. And B, I grew up in two extremely large and diverse cities. And so moving to Eugene, where things were a lot more homogenous in terms of race, and, just the food, everything was pretty, I don't know, it was really different for me. It was more of an adjustment than I expected, but I got through it and I went to school there. I worked in a bunch of restaurants. And then when I was in undergrad, I got really interested in sociology, specifically social movements and how people collectively can change the world. I know that sounds really optimistic, but it's true. And so I got really interested in that. I did a lot of research on that. And I knew that I wanted to kind of build a career out of bringing people together and trying to affect systemic change. So I graduated from there, and then I took a few years off and just continued to work in restaurants. I've probably worked in 10 different restaurants, doing every position possible. Have you ever worked in a restaurant?
I've not been in restaurants, but I've been in customer service. So I worked at Fred Meyer for 9 years. So I get the whole being in front of people all day.
We're probably better people and better customers because of it, because, we've been on the receiving end of that. But it was after I took a few years off from after I graduated college, I decided it was time to maybe pursue further education. And I was lucky that I worked a lot as a kid. And so I had a lot of money saved up to pay for college and grad school. And so I had this opportunity to continue my education without going into too much debt. And so I decided to move up to Portland to pursue a master's in conflict resolution with a focus on social movements and creating space for dialogue. And really, I feel like conflict resolution is basically learning to listen. And so that has driven my career forward, is creating space for people to talk about what's going on and then figure out how we can collectively make it better. And so since then, I have had, the last decade and a half, I've worked at a variety of nonprofits doing everything from direct service, social services, social work, to community outreach, to project management. I've done a lot of different jobs within the nonprofit space, but my favorite thing was definitely the community outreach, trying to get people excited and mobilized to, do something together. And then about 4.5 years ago, I had my first son, and it was at a time when I was still in the kind of social work side of nonprofits, and I felt myself getting pretty burnt out. I didn't feel like I had quite as much to offer because I was also, working really hard as a new parent. And so I decided to step away from my full-time job that I had had for a long time at an organization and just do some freelance consulting work. I was able to build up enough connections that I had the opportunity to consult on some projects and just help, create. Basically, I did a lot of different types of consulting, but one of the jobs I had was working with this company that was putting on a live storytelling show. So it was called Super Women in Tech. It was at the Aladdin Theater. I know you love storytelling. And so it was basically like about the people telling stories were women working in technology. So talking about their experiences, their journeys, the challenges, and just being part of putting that project together, I just learned so much about what was happening in the industry. And I also connected with PDXWIT through that experience because they helped us, find speakers and promote it with their community. And so it was this like kind of coming together of this passion I had for like community building and like affecting change with this opportunity where this organization, PDXWIT, decided that it was time to hire somebody on and to have their first paid employee. And I was starting to get a little over the consulting stuff and ready for another like regular job. Consulting is like really nice in theory because you get to pick your jobs and make your own hours, but then you feel like you can't turn it down because what if the next job doesn't come? And it can just be a lot to manage. So I was like ready for that predictability again of having a job. And so that's when I joined PDXWIT, and I was the only employee for a while. But since then, our staff team has tripled, meaning there are 3 of us now, not just 1 of us. And our community is up to about 9,000. We've got over 100 volunteers. Like things have definitely expanded and grown quite a bit. So, and now here I am today talking to you.
Holy smokes. Wow. Well, that's an incredible story, Elizabeth. Thank you very much for sharing. So from 2 to like age 13 or 14, you were in commercials, you were acting, a little bit of both?
Yeah, I was modeling and in commercials and some TV shows and Lifetime movies. Things that you probably wouldn't remember now. But yeah, it really helped to basically the biggest thing was I was making money that we weren't spending. It was very much being put away for college for a very specific use. I'm super grateful for my mom being like the opposite of a stage mom. She never put pressure on us. And she was very smart about like ensuring that our money was going to be protected until we really needed it for our education.
And your brother too?
Yeah, my brother was a little more successful than I was. He did more like movies and TV stuff. I was more of like a commercial kid. But yeah, I mean, it's funny thinking about at that time, because of what I do now, I have such open eyes to lack of representation in different spaces. And like when I was a kid, the kids on TV, the kids in shows, the kids on the back of the toy boxes, they looked like me. Like they were like this sort of blonde, blue-eyed, very uniform looking child that now I'm happy to see that that's shifted a bit. It's still, there still needs to be a lot more work done in the entertainment space to have more diversity and representation. But I'd like to think that now it would be harder for me as a kid to get a job because like maybe they're not just hiring kids who look like me. But at the time I fit that mold, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. Wow. Super fascinating.
I've never told anybody really about this besides. So maybe you want to cut it out. I don't know. We'll see.
Absolutely not. I'm sorry. It's in here. It's locked. So 9,000 members with PDXWIT. That's amazing. And for full disclosure, everybody, Itsmotive has been a long-standing member of PDXWIT. We can't say enough good things about you folks and what you do for the community, and we'd like to talk more about that. So, one of my questions was going to be, how did they find you, or how did you find them? And you talked about that, but can you tell us about the history of PDXWIT from its beginnings to the present day? As you said, in 3+ years, you've tripled your staff, and they hired you as the first full-time employee. What's it been like for these last several years for PDXWIT to where it is currently today?
Sure. So we're coming up on our 10-year anniversary of our very first meetup. So that would have been in December of 2011. And we were founded by someone named Megan Bigelow, who is a dear friend of mine still. She's still very active in the community. But basically the story is she found out sort of by happenstance that somebody that she was working with at a tech company, a white man, was making a little over 30% more than she was salary wise. And she had not only been at the company longer, but she hired, she was on the hiring committee for this person. She helped train this person. It was very clear to her that it was like a salary inequity. It wasn't about this person having more experience or whatnot. And so it really opened her eyes. Prior to that, she thought the tech industry was based on meritocracy and like your experience, your performance, like that's what dictates your pay. Why would gender factor into that? So it opened her eyes up to the fact that, yes, gender is very much a factor in salary. So is race. So are a lot of other factors. And so she started just kind of quietly having conversations with other women in the tech industry at other companies and saying like, hey, I discovered this. Like, what do you think of this? And she realized a lot of women were just kind of quietly dealing with inequities at their jobs. So whether it's a lack of opportunity to advance within the company, or feeling like you'll say something in a meeting, no one really acknowledges it, and then the guy in the meeting says the same thing and suddenly it's a great idea. So these kind of little things that end up adding up and making it so it can be really challenging to work in this industry. And so she decided like enough women that were in her network were struggling with this. Why not create a bit of community so that we can at least have some space to support each other if we're not going to feel supported at our own companies. And so it started with different women who would be like, hey, we can meet up at my office after hours and let's, bring a bottle of wine, or let's meet at this coffee shop over the lunch hour and chat. And it was like 5, 10, 20, growing quickly with people coming to these meetups. And she would say she kind of unintentionally just started building a movement, realizing like, whoa, there's a real need for this community space for people to come together and not feel so alone. And so since then, it's really continued on, and like we are building community. We continue to have events that bring people together, but we've also added initiatives that align more with like advocacy and championing certain efforts, creating scholarships for people who want to access the industry. We've got a job board. We've got of course, partnerships, like you said, with lots of tech companies like yours, and about almost 90 other tech companies that are partnered with us to advance our mission forward. And so it's continued to be pretty true to those early days of like just creating space for people to feel connected, but it's hopefully also had more of like a systemic, tangible impact on shaping a better industry in Portland and maybe beyond.
Yeah, we all owe a lot to Megan. I'd put her up on that Mount Rushmore of Portland and tech.
Yeah.
She's definitely one of the four for sure.
Absolutely. Yep.
So when you are considering a company to join PDXWIT, what do you look for, Elizabeth? What is some of the criteria that you're looking for these member companies?
Yeah, that's a great question. So about, I want to say 3 years ago, so pretty early in my tenure at PDXWIT, we pulled together a committee of some volunteers within PDXWIT, some company leaders, to create some guidelines, some screening criteria for the companies that were basically offering to give us money. And we wanted to be sure that we weren't just taking money from companies that weren't aligned with our values. As much as we need those resources and funds, it's more important that we are true to our own values and what we believe is important in this industry. So we once a company expresses interest in partnering with us, we will say, okay, great, we're interested too. This sounds great. We're going to do a screening process and we'll get back to you about, next steps. And so then we have, sometimes it's volunteers, sometimes it's me, sometimes it's a colleague of mine. We do a screening process where we research the company. We look to see, have there been any patterns when it comes to, let's say, reviews on Glassdoor or, news stories? Like, what can we find with our friend Google about this company? And I would say that we know that there are plenty of amazing companies that are in alignment with our values that have some negative reviews. Like, we definitely take the big picture look, but if we see a pattern that multiple women say, or multiple Black women are saying, this CEO such and such, or this company was not friendly to parents, or kind of just big picture patterns, if we have concerns, then usually it's me, sometimes it's a colleague. We'll reach out to the company contact who has expressed interest in sponsoring, and we'll very kindly just say, this came up when we were doing some research. We don't want to rule you out as a sponsor, but we're just curious. Can you talk to us a little bit about this? Most of the time, companies are aware that this information is out there, and they most of the time are taking steps to correct and be better. And sometimes partnering with PDXWIT is one of those steps in the right direction for them. It's the times when companies are unwilling to talk to us about the concerns we have, where we're like, yeah, maybe not a good match. If you're not even willing to talk about the fact that this has been an issue in the past, or give us any kind of insight into what you're doing internally to be sure you're creating a welcoming and safe environment for women and other populations that are underrepresented. And so it's at that point that occasionally we've had to just say, thanks, but no thanks. We wish you the best, but not really in alignment with what PDXWIT is about. And really, that has not happened very many times. I can count it on one hand. So most of the time, companies really want to have that conversation about, like, yeah, it's a shame that this information's out there. It's a shame that this happened. Here's A, B, C, D of what we've done since then to get on the right track.
Yeah, very good. And you mentioned values, core values, obviously. What are some of those core values with PDXWIT?
Yeah. And I'm realizing I haven't even really said our mission. Maybe our listeners here will already know, but basically, like, the value, the mission, what we're doing here as an organization is we're trying to build a better tech industry. And we're doing that by creating access, by dismantling inequities, and by fueling belonging. So we kind of see those three core areas as the work ahead in order to create an industry that is well represented when it comes to perspectives, when it comes to race, when it comes to age, gender, learning styles, brain styles. And so really our mission conveys, I'd say, our values around where we see, like, the areas that need the most attention. I think in the past, we talked a lot about, like, we want to encourage people to join the industry. We want to empower them. But we weren't really talking about how to do that. Or, like, what if somebody really wants to get into tech, but they don't have a computer? They don't have, like, the very basic access points in. And so we've really tried to zoom out a bit from that sort of encouragement, empowerment as the starting point, and think about, like, what does a person need before they can even be encouraged? And maybe that's a computer, maybe that's a class on, like, very basic tech literacy. Like, some people don't know how to use Google Docs or Google Drive, or, setting up a LinkedIn profile can be really scary for a lot of people. And we know that LinkedIn is huge in the tech industry. And so really trying to pull back on those more, like, very basic steps in the right direction has been a real focus for us lately. Our scholarship fund is one key way we try to do that. And then in terms of other values that are really important to me, and I believe to our whole organization, is we need to be talking about intersectionality when we're talking about, diversity or inclusion or equity. We can't just be focusing on, like, one identity at one time, because all of us have a lot of different layered identities to us. So I am a white woman, was born in California, have, lived in Oregon. I've got 2 sons. I've got, I speak Italian. My dad is gay. Like, I've got a whole lot of different things that make me who I am. And so that's going to impact how I move through the world. And the same goes for every other human on the planet. And so if we're just narrowly focusing on gender, or focusing on race, or focusing on, if someone's in the LGBTQ plus community, we're really missing out on the bigger picture. And so intersectionality and understanding how that factors in, how that can, give people a boost in their career, or how it can continue to create barriers, is really important to us. I'd say another value that, this isn't a value, but it's more of an acknowledgement that white supremacy exists, and it's everywhere, and it's the air we breathe, unfortunately. And it's very important that, especially me as a white person in this space, acknowledges that I've got heaps of unearned privilege. Unfortunately, white supremacy is probably part of the reason I was able to work as a kid, part of the reason I could afford a college education. And so just being open and saying those words out loud and not like hiding from the fact that these patterns exist is another value of PDXWIT that we're trying to be really open about.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah. Thank you very much for all of that. I know that you folks are hiring at PDXWIT.
Sure are.
And I think this is newer news, maybe. I think these are maybe newer positions and possibly hot off the press.
Yeah, we are. And we not only are we hiring, but I feel like everybody's hiring right now. It is a competitive landscape out there, as you well know.
Yes, I do know.
Yeah. So we are building, continuing to expand our team. Right now we have an open position. It's community engagement coordinator. So this person we're looking for will play a key role in shaping our communications and continuing to tell the PDXWIT story through our members and through our events, and just really ensuring that people know what PDXWIT is up to, and also what the companies that we work with are up to. So communications is a big part of the role. And then the engagement side is really like building relationships with companies like Itsmotive or other tech companies, building relationships with other organizations that we want to give visibility to. So something in the last year that we've really worked hard on is knowing that we've got a pretty big platform, and we've got the ear of a lot of people working in tech who are pretty well resourced, meaning they've got money to donate to causes that matter. And so yes, we're a nonprofit and we need money too, but there are organizations in the community on the ground doing extremely important work every day that we want to be sure the PDXWIT community is aware of. So the community engagement coordinator that we're hiring will really help to identify who those community organizations are and how we can leverage the PDXWIT community to support them. So it's a super exciting role. Being that we're a small team, we all kind of do everything. So like in one day, I'll be doing like a 10-year strategy visioning for PDXWIT. And then on the same day, I'll be like working on a tiny spreadsheet, like administrative project and everything in between. And so while this job that we're hiring for has a job description and core things it'll be working on, we also all kind of do everything.
Yeah. Wearing multiple hats.
Yes.
Yes. Very good.
So if people are interested, they can go to the PDXWIT job board and check out the community engagement coordinator position. And also there's so many other amazing jobs on that job board. So highly recommend anybody who is job seeking, or even if you're happy with your job, it's always good to know what else is out there. I think the best time to look for a job is when you have a job that you don't yet hate. So.
Amen. Amen. And it's interesting, this part of our history has been called the Great Resignation. I don't know if you've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard I can't even say it out loud. She session, the pattern of women and caregivers leaving their jobs at really alarming rates. And I get it. I mean, I've been parenting through this pandemic, 2 young kids, while also trying to keep things afloat at PDXWIT. And there are times when I want to give up on all of it and just focus on one or the other. Of course, I'm not going to do that. But yeah, I can absolutely understand why plenty of women and parents and caregivers have had to basically let their careers go for now so they can focus at home. I've been really inspired by the companies that I've seen really taking steps to try to I don't know, acknowledge that that's happening and build pathways back in. So I know that Nike, they have a program that's specific to caregivers who have taken a certain amount of time off to focus on their families, to really kind of give them a fast track back into their career so they don't have to start over. I'd love to see PDXWIT taking some kind of initiative along those lines of really trying to, I mean, plenty of people are not going to come back to work, but I'm sure others, once things stabilize and school's back in session for real, are going to want to kind of get back into it and don't want to have to start over. So,
yeah, not making it a liability for the candidate if they've had a gap in their
right,
resume for understandably, good reasons, and
right.
not make that oh, well, you've been out of work for a year or a year and a half or 6 months or whatever the case is. And as a new parent myself, a newer parent, I can really relate to how much it takes to raise a child and, always be there for the child, or in your case, children. Right. And so, I think I'm glad that we are talking about this. I think it does need to be brought up and make it where it's okay for candidates to have those kind of gaps. And
yeah, and I mean, in some ways, I think it can be framed really positively. Like in our job descriptions for PDXWIT, we have desired qualifications or experiences that are probably going to lend themselves well to the job. But before those are even listed, we've got a paragraph that says, we believe lived experience is just as important as professional experience. If you think you could thrive in this position, you should still apply, and let's talk about it. Just because I think, especially, we know the data is there that women tend to apply for jobs that they're almost 100% qualified versus men. It's, in the 60% area. And so really trying to put that message out there to not discourage, to encourage people who otherwise would self-select out. And I think that's, one of the key strategies that companies need to be aware of when they're writing job descriptions. The language they're using to describe the role, the qualifications they're listing, the outreach materials, like who's currently on your website, like what faces are being externally, if I don't see myself, I don't want to be the first woman there. I don't, and I mean, the same goes for when you're interviewing for a job. Like I know that I have been in interviews where there were 4 people and they were all white men. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll work here, but is this going to be what every meeting feels like? And so, yeah, more and more companies need to be super aware of that. I think, of course, there's a responsibility on the job seeker to go for it and to, do what they need to do to build the skills to qualify for these positions. But the responsibility, in my opinion, is way more on the company when it comes to recruiting diverse talent and retaining them.
Yeah, things like, these are my pet peeves, but Rockstar and Ninja and 10X and all that stuff. And I mean, just to me, there's no need for that.
No need. Yeah. And also being really, I mean, I know it's still not very common, especially in tech, but I think salary transparency is super important when companies can do it. Listing a salary range on the job description is going to save a lot of people's time. If, you go for a job and then you suddenly realize the salary is not going to work for you, everyone's time has been wasted. So why can't we be more transparent on the front end of what the benefits are going to look like, what the salary is going to look like? Unfortunately, I know why. And that's because companies typically are trying to get the best deal they can. So they don't list the salary. But what they're doing when they do that is they're basically making it so a lot more people are not going to apply because the transparency isn't there. So we need more of that. I'm not necessarily all for let's tell everybody what everyone in this company makes. I feel like salary transparency is on a continuum. And right now, most companies are very much it's a black box. It's opaque. We don't have any idea how much anyone in here makes. So at least some baby steps to putting a salary range in the job description, or maybe disclosing what your compensation formula is. So maybe it's based on experience, maybe it's based on, a variety of different factors. We should be telling that to candidates and to people who are already working within the company, so they know how to continue to stay motivated and try to get those promotions and get those salary increases.
Well, let me just say that Itsmotive stands behind PDXWIT with the core values that you talked about. And I think it's something that I just want to express to you, Elizabeth, and to your staff. So we appreciate what you all do. We do.
Well, we appreciate having the support of Itsmotives and, a lot of other companies who are not just, doing the sponsorship or the partnership so they can get the logo on the website, but also deeply engaging. So, it means a lot. And it's why we can do what we do. All of our programming, membership, everything is free to the community. And the only way we can pull that off is because we have companies who are members and sponsors of our organization. So it's pretty huge to have that support.
Sure. You bet. Kind of shifting gears back to you a bit. You've been incredibly successful in your life. I mean, my goodness, from age 2 years old, you've been working, right? As we established early on. What has been some of the keys to your success, Elizabeth? Could you share any tips or tricks or anything of that nature that if you look back, how did you get to this point? Because again, you have been incredibly successful in your career.
Yeah. It's hard to pull back and really know what has led. I mean, I'll just say, if I haven't said it enough times, I think some of my success is what I was born into, in terms of I had a leg up because of the fact that I'm white, because I have 2 parents who were, actively involved in my childhood. And so I don't take that level of sort of unearned success lightly. I know that's very real. But in terms of things that I've tried to do to continue that, success, I think it really comes down to my education in conflict resolution and sociology, and really understanding people and what their needs are. And when it comes down to it, people need to be heard, and people need to have the space to feel like their voice matters, that what they're doing has meaning and power. And so I've really just tried to apply that in the various leadership roles I've had, to be I don't want to be the focal point of this organization. I just want to try to set up systems and spaces that people feel empowered to really collectively drive forward change. I tend to try to keep myself somewhat invisible. I know that sometimes I have to, be externally facing within PDXWIT, but my preference is really elevating everybody else within this community so that together we can, represent it. So yeah, I'd say just being a good listener, trying to understand what people's needs are, seeing the humanity in everyone, and understanding that nobody's perfect and no system is perfect, and that it's not about canceling or trying to, only be with people who are exactly like you and aligned with your values, but instead trying to build, bridges for communication. And that I'd say the humanity is really what it comes down to. And then more tactically, I'm not always good at this, but I do try to have really good boundaries between my work and my, work as a mom and as a member of my family. And so sometimes it's easier said than done, but I really try to ensure that, for example, my mornings are just totally dedicated to playing with my kids and making breakfast. And I really try not to check my email or my Slack or my calendar or anything until they're kind of out the door and onto their day. And I found that I'm better when I have a little space and distance between the end of yesterday and the beginning of the next day, rather than just constantly being tuned in. The volunteers at PDXWIT and my colleagues might be hearing this and will call me out, because there are times when I'm emailing at 9 p.m. or 6 a.m. So I don't want to say I do it every time, but like overall, I do try to have pretty firm times that I'm really checked out from work and totally tuned into family, rather than trying to split my attention simultaneously, because that just doesn't work for me.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, all of it.
Yeah.
A couple last questions. One of them is the why question. To me, it's a simple, very innocent question on the surface, but it actually sometimes makes people really think, and it can be kind of complex. But, besides providing for your family and yourself, putting a roof over your head and feeding food and clothes and all the basics, what gets you out of bed every morning? Why do you come to work? Why do you do what you do? What's your why?
Well, I want to hear your why, but I'll try to share mine first. Because yours sounds simple, which is very exciting to me, because it's hard for me to think about it simply. But if I had to really boil it down, I think my why is knowing that I am very small in all of this. Like, I am such a little blip in the world. And even though I'm this little blip on this rock that's just, floating around in space, I have this power and this opportunity to make my little blip in history matter, and to raise two boys that understand that like what they do and what they say matters, and that they have a level of privilege that they better leverage for good. And that I feel like it's that understanding that like, yeah, I'm pretty small in this whole big scenario of the world, but even within that, I have this power to have some level of systemic change. And I'm an optimist, even though when we're in the midst of the 18th month of the pandemic, it can be hard to be optimistic. I do somehow still feel like I think things are overall going to be okay if we continue to work hard every day to create the change we want to see. So yeah, I think it's my why is that I think I have an opportunity that I might as well try to tap into, while also understanding that like the whole world doesn't revolve around me. What's your why? Do we have time?
Of course we do. But first and foremost, the word I keep coming back to with you, if I would use one word, is humble. You've got such humility, Elizabeth. You really do. That's the word that just keeps coming back to me. Like how you describe you're the member of your family, you're the small thing, in the bigger picture, and you're, just trying to empower people and get out of people's way. And yes, I think humility, humbleness, humility, humble, all those words, that's
I'll
what comes
take
to
it.
mind.
Why not?
That's what I hear. That's what I hear. Without you saying it, that's just kind of what I am picking up from our conversation. As far as my why, so it's three things, and it's helped me when I was soon to be a parent last summer. The months leading up to it, I was having these moments of like, I can't do this. I'm not parent material. This is the first child, that I've been a part of, so to say, in this world. And so it came down to, I kept reminding myself of what my professional why is and how it's so similar to my personal why. And those are three things: build long-term relationships, make connections, career connections, and grow people. And the making, creating the long-term relationships and growing people, I'll get that with my daughter, Angelina. One day, maybe I'll be able to make, career connections for her. And I'm a natural connector, whether it's personal or professional. If I'm having friends over and they're like, yeah, I'm looking for a new position, and even if it's not in IT, I'll be like, who do I know? I've got to know somebody in your field that I can make a connection to, or whatever the case might be. So those are my three things, and it really helped me. Again, before we had Angelina, it was August 7th of last year, leading up to it, it kind of calmed me down a bit and made me like, Tony, you can do this.
Yeah.
You got this. But those are my three
I
as
love
far as
that.
my whys. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. And I love that your daughter's name is Angeline. It
Yeah.
reminds me of your brother, Angelo, who I love.
We named her after Angelo. She doesn't know that yet. But we'll let her know the history of Angelo and where her name came from. And it's one of the greatest ways I could honor my brother for sure. Yep. One last question. Hobbies. What do you do outside of work? What do you do? What are your passions? Like, I always ask people very simply, what do you do on Saturdays or Sundays?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm definitely in a phase where I'm so consumed by these young children who I just chase after. So it can be hard to think about like what my own interests are right now, besides being a good parent. But I love watching documentaries. I love a good murder show. Can't help it. But I also like, watch all kinds of content that's probably rotting my brain. But on Saturdays, that's a good question, because so we live in a fixer-upper that we moved into a few years ago. And so I guess sometimes we're chipping away at that, although it's not been very fixed or upped since we moved in. But when there's spare time, we're like thinking about like, ooh, what can we do here, and what color should we paint this wall? And so that's definitely like probably a 10-year project, realistically, given the rate at which things have been going so far. But that's something that I get a lot of pleasure out of, is kind of trying to build our nest and our space that is going to work for our family.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. Yeah. I'm sure you got your hands completely full with two young boys.
Yep. 2 and 4, Wesley and
4.
Max. They are so busy.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Very good. Elizabeth, it was a pleasure. Thank you for coming on the show, talking about your journey, PDXWIT, and you have such a memorable story. I mean, really, it's super fascinating. And we, again, at Itsmotive, and I think I speak for a lot of the member companies out there, we appreciate what you and your staff do, and we very much thank you.
Thank you. This has been a really fun conversation. I appreciate the opportunity to chat.